7. Even after I was released, Asuna continued to hug the Dark Elf Knight for another 5 seconds. I always believed we'd see you before long, but I'm still so happy to see you, Kismel smiled. So am I. Even after coming here through the spirit tree, I found that I was always thinking of you two. The dark elf seemed to be savoring those words as she said them. I understood right away what made her seem different from before. She was wearing only a long dress of a deep purple to cover her slender form, and her usual armor, saber, and cape were gone. She had never removed the equipment in the third-floor camp, except for when she was in her own tent. I remember Kismel's gaze move from Asuna to me, the smile still stuck on her face. I'm surprised that you knew where to find me here. Isn't this your first visit to the castle? Lucky guess, I stammered. Of course I knew the spot, because it had stuck me deeply during the beta test. At the time, there was no thorny hedge maze, just a dusty stone path with a single dry, dead tree in the middle. But there was obviously something more about the place, and thus it stuck in my memory. Her smile deepened at my answer, and she looked up at the massive trees stretching over our heads. My sister loved the oil refined from this juniper. Perhaps that's why I found myself here. I looked up at the tree and breathed a deep breath in through my nose, my lungs filled with cool, pure woody scent. So, this is a juniper tree? Asuna noted, sniffing the same smell. In the world where we come from, it's also used as flavoring for alcohol. Is that so? I shall have to give it a try sometime. At any rate, thank you for coming. I suppose you vanquished the guardian beast in the Pillar of Heavens without trouble. Yeah, it helped that the base commander warned us about the poison attacks. Kismel nodded sagely. Yes, he's a trustworthy man. I wish to rejoin the advance party down on the 3rd floor as soon as I can, but... She looked down at her dress she was wearing and squinted. The smile came back just as quickly, though, and she patted Asuna on the back. Let's go back inside. You must be hungry after rowing all this way, yes? Very hungry, she responded. They started walking for the door. As I trotted after them, I couldn't help but think, I was the one doing all the rowing. Just as I remembered, the dining hall of Yofil Castle was on the 2nd floor of the West Wing. Inside, there was a drool-inducing smells and pleasant chatter atop the gentle stairs of string music. All of this had been upgraded since the beta, so I couldn't help but look around with curiosity. Nearly everyone eating at this pristinely set tables was a soldier in leather armor, but there was also a group of what looked like mages in long robes, and even a few small children. That seemed strange. I thought that the power of magic had been lost in the creation of the floating castle of Aincrad, according to legend. As we walked toward an empty table to sit down, Kismel noticed my stare at the robed figures and leaned in to whisper. These are the priests who serve the holy tree. They were dispatched from the palace on the 9th floor to oversee our operations to retrieve the keys. Priests. I ran a mental search on the term, thinking it was unfamiliar within Aincrad. Sure enough, I had no memory of it during the beta. I had made a note to look into them more into the future. Asuna asked the next question. And the kids? They are the children of the castle's master. Such bright young spirits, Kismel explained, beaming as she guided us to the table in the back. NPC maids, dark elves of course, brought us out a full-course meal, starting with soup and an appetizer. When they brought out roast chicken for the main dish, Asuna and I couldn't help but share a look. I didn't think elves had any reason to celebrate Christmas, but the dish was a little too close to traditional. Perhaps it was a games holiday event. While they didn't follow it up with a cake, we had an excellent view of the snow-covered juniper tree in the courtyard, though, through the hall's large window, which made the meal pleasantly festive. Our main topic of conversation during the meal was the waterways that were central to the fourth floor experience. Kismel was most interested in our stories about the inner tube swim from the staircase to the main town and the battle against the fire bear for our shipbuilding material. During that discussion, I asked and discovered that the dark elves did not cut down living trees either. But it was not out of any restrictive law, but rather for an aged plant out of respect. That made them different from reluctantly obedient fallen elves. Fortunately, she said that collecting wood from trees destroyed by monsters was allowed. I'm glad that we'd taken the trouble to get high-quality material. Once we finished our fruit dessert, Kismel took us to the officer's room on the fourth floor of the East Wing. It was quite an upgrade from the second floor 10-man barracks of the Beta, but this was a suite room with 2 bedrooms and a shared living room, which meant, "Use this room while staying at the castle," Kismel offered. "Oh, what a lovely place," Asuna cried, racing to the large window in the back, and only belatedly realizing the presence of the doors on either wall. She looked left and right, then back in confusion, but it was hesitation on immediately demanding on different rooms. I had the option of requesting it as well, but I was afraid of significant downgrade to the barracks, and Kismel spoke up before I could say anything either. "In that case, I will be in the adjacent room to the left. Knock on the door if you need anything. Enjoy your rest tonight. You must be tired." She shut the door, and quiet footsteps faded away. Left alone in the gorgeous suite, we could only stare at each other in silence. "Well, hey, at least it's not the first time for this," Asuna started off. I nodded eagerly. "It's pretty much unavoidable if we want to prioritize beating the game." Nod. "But I will say just one thing." Nod. "Your Christmas present was reuniting us with Kismel, right? That was a wonderful present. Thank you." I nodded one last time and mumbled uneasily. You're welcome. But in all honesty, I'm glad we saw her again. She seems a little subdued, though." "Yeah." That seemed to have shifted her mind from the sudden sweet dilemma to Kismel's current state, as she wore a slightly different look of concern now. "The dress looked very nice on her, but I don't think she was wearing it out of choice. I wonder why she wasn't in her armor." "Didn't she have her sword, though?" "Either. Perhaps there must some state of affairs forcing her to stay here. Wonder if she'll tell us if we ask." I glanced over at the neighboring room that housed the elf knight. While I'd never spoken of this with Asuna, I knew that Kismel was different from other NPCs. While at Romolo, the shipwright, for example, had engaged in very natural conversations with us. That was because we were careful to never say anything unrelated to shipbuilding questline. But Kismel had started talking about why she loved that tree in the courtyard just from seeing me look up at it. That as far out as the norm of NPC conversational's ability, which only responded properly when it heard statements that fit its content parameters. But I wasn't so sure Kismel had been special from the very start. When we first met her on the 3rd floor of the Forest of Wavering Mist, Kismel said, "Don't interfere! Be gone from this place!" Exactly the same thing she started with in the beta, down to the word. Through some reason I didn't understand, the quest story, which said that both she and the Forest Elf Knight would die, had been overwritten. In that instant, something happened to Kismel, and she stopped being a normal NPC. Did the fact that she'd been given a memory thoughtfulness beyond the bounds of NPC mean she was a high-functioning AI? If that guess was correct, it gave birth to a new mystery. Was it real-life GM who changed her, or was it the system that controlled SAO? In the retail version of SAO, the cage that housed this shocking and unprecedented incident, only Akihito Kayaba controlled the reins. I had no idea where he was or what he was doing now, but I couldn't imagine him taking the time to alter the specifications of a single NPC by hand. But neither could I imagine why he wouldn't turn it into an AI. Meanwhile, I couldn't even say if the game system was advanced enough to allow for such a function. If that was true, the system that kept this virtual world running was far more than just a program. It was equipped with a level of autonomy that encompassed artificial intelligence on its own. A suspicious voice reached my ears as I stared at the plastered wall, completely lost in thought. Hello, Kirito? Sorry, what did you say? I didn't say anything. Asuna was leaning against the window with her arms folded and pointing out at two docks with a look. Which bedroom did you want? Either one is fine. I'll use this one then, she announced, pointing at the door on the east wall. Then I realized that the main room had two other small doors aside from the one on the bedroom. One was to the bathroom, and the other looked like a closet. The bathroom was next to the eastern bedroom. She probably didn't feel comfortable with the idea of bathing while I was sleeping on the other side of the wall. I told her to go right ahead, of course, then added something that popped into my head. But on the third floor of the castle, there should be a super huge bathing room. Super? Yeah, super. With separate baths for men and women? Yeah, wait. According to my memory, the bathing hall was at the very tip of the west wing of the third floor, but I didn't remember if it had separate baths for men and women. Back in the beta, I preferred to kill as many monsters as possible rather than waste time relaxing in the bath. Sorry, I don't know for sure, I admitted, throwing up my hands. Asuna sighed. I have a bad feeling about this. Come on, let's go. Me too? Well, I don't know where it is. This was a castle, not a labyrinthine dungeon, so I could probably explain the directions to her, but she spoke with such direct conviction that I didn't have any option but to accept her command. We left the suite and used the grand stairs in the center of the castle to descend to the third floor. I had to fight the urge to open and inspect the contents of the countless doors we passed in the hall, but finally we reached the far end of the west wing. There I saw a familiar arch. Through that threshold, the red carpet turned to white marble tiles. I was relieved to see that the bathhouse hadn't disappeared in the redesign. Beyond the arch, I turned us to the right. The hallway came to an abrupt end, with another arched entrance to the left, through which floated the echoing sounds of the water. We shared a look, peered through the arch at the same time, to see a single grand changing room. They don't split the bath, my partner said. I coughed awkwardly. Well, I guess that was the same for the bathing tent on the third floor. Perhaps it's just how elves do things? It's probably just a data volume issue, though, I silently added to myself. Anyway, I'll just use the bath back in the room. You should enjoy yourself here, Asuna. I'll see you in a while. As soon as I turned around to flee, a hand caught me in the back of the collar. I timidly turned around to see the fencer glaring up at me, a conflicted look on her face. She grunted. I wonder what kind of nuance I was meant to take away from that. Then I recalled a similar situation occurring in the bathing tent back in camp. Back then, Asuna was afraid of a male dark elf wandering into the tent while she was bathing, so I stood outside on watch. That meant she probably wanted me to do the same thing now. It's gonna be pretty hard for me to warn you from the outside of a huge bath like this. Plus, I can't block NPCs from going in. She grunted again, looking at the changing room with longing. It didn't seem like there was anyone in the bath now, but there was no saying how long that would be in the castle. In this instance, Asuna, for bathing enthusiasts, would just have to give up. It seemed clear to me. I know, she suddenly piped up, leaping into the changing room and sitting in one of the many wicker chairs. She popped up her window and started taking out items left and right. A lot of colored cloth and small box of sewing tools ended up clattering onto the marble table. I was baffled as to what she was going to do. I walked to the arch for a better look, just as the changing room itself was huge. The floor and the walls were covered in pure white tiles. Shining chandelier hung from the ceiling, and a large potted plant sat in the corners. There were no automatic dryers or massage chairs, but there was a pitcher of iced water for several kinds of fruit on the table in the center. I nibbled on what looked like a big grape, then tossed the rest into my mouth to watch Asuna work. She used the crystal bottle of Keala to re-equip her tailoring skill, and was about to make something with the item she'd just produced. As a matter of fact, I might have been the first time I'd ever seen her use the tailoring skill at work. Asuna selected a plain white piece of cloth out of her mountain textiles, then pulled a large pair of scissors out of the box. She tapped the scissors next to the pull-up list of items she could create. Then she made her choice, set the scissors to the cloth, and then ripped them through with a brilliant metallic swing. Suddenly, the exact same way as ingots struck by a blacksmith hammer, the cloth started glowing and changing shape. What emerged was two pieces of cloth in exactly the same shape. Asuna put the scissors back into the box and placed the two pieces together, then started poking the hem of the cloth with a silver needle. That action had to be analogous to the striking of the ingot with the smithing hammer. Her handiwork was quick and sure, and the sewing had been done in moments. The cloth started to glow again, then ballooned from its flat state into something properly clothing-like, with actual volume. It was an ordinary one-piece swimsuit. "Done!" she exclaimed proudly, holding the swimsuit up. Are you going to wear that into the bath? That's not against the rules, is it? Or is my wearing the swimsuit in the bath going to inconvenience you in some way? Not in the least, I finished, shaking my head. With the kind of massive bath in the castle like this would have, a person could probably treat it like a pool, in fact. It might even be fun. I wasn't particularly attached to the bathing in Aincrad, but I had to admit I was a little jealous of the situation. But the only swimwear I had was the pair of bull logo boxers I had onto the last attack bonus from General Buran, and I didn't want to wear those unless it was an emergency. I side-eyed the swimsuit my tailor partner was holding up happily against her body and groaned with envy when she looked back briefly and put on a foreboding grin. I had a bad feeling about the pleased smile on her face. "By the way, I haven't given you a present in return yet, have I?" No need for that. I didn't give you a physical present to begin with, after all. No, I think I made it much happier than any store-bought item, so I want to give you back something good. And it is Christmas Eve, after all. Well, if you're offering, I'll happily accept anything you give me, I said, shivering inside at her suddenly gentle tone and smile. Asuna sat back down on the chair and pulled out a black piece of cloth from the pile. She cut up a smaller cloth with the scissors and sewed it up. When a light subsided, she was holding a pair of surf shorts. Black, just the way I like them. "Oh, cool. I wasn't afraid to wear these in front of others." I took a step forward in delight, but she held up her hand to stop me. With that same hand, she selected a brilliant orange scrap from the cloth pile. The 3 steps of the setting, cutting, and sewing took place in an instant. The swimsuit glowed again. From what I could see, nothing had changed, and she met my confusion with a smirk, then smartly flipped around the back of the surf shorts with an exposed rear. "What the hell is that?" There was a brilliantly shaped patch on the bum of the shorts, glowing flaming orange. "Here you go. Merry Christmas." She smiled and held them out to me. I had no choice but to thank her and accept them. The golden bull on red, the or the orange bear on black? While I grappled with the ultimate decision, Asuna changed into her white one-piece swimsuit and pushed open the clouded glass door in the back of the room and only let out a cry of wonder, just as grand as she'd admitted in Novela. I scurried over, short still in hand, and peered over her back. Even I had a grunt in amazement. The size of the bath chamber was the same as the beta, but it had received a considerable visual upgrade. The tiles on the floor were an ivory white, so pure one could see through them. The bath in the back was made of the horizontally lined ebony basalt that surrounded the lake, but the polished to a perfect sheen. It was indeed about as large as a pool. The gold faucets set into the wall were pouring out a constant waterfall of water that filled the tub already. Gently cascading, the southern walls of the chamber were made of glass, offering a huge vista of the lake in falling snow. There were no elves in the bath before us. Must have been too early to bathe. I'm first. Asuna trotted over to the tiles in her bare feet toward the massive tub. I watched the wide open back of her swimsuit as I hung back at the entrance, with only one glare at each other in red and black shorts. I opened up my menu. The two pressed of unequipped load button. I placed the black shorts in my bottom underwear slot and stuck the red shorts in my inventory, then raced after my partner, who was standing at the edge of the tub. With an enormous leap, I launched myself over to her and landed in the bath first, sending up a huge spout of water. The last thing I heard before the water was a strangled yelp. Feck! Several minutes later, Asuna's mood had recovered. She was sitting in the southwest corner of the tub, looking at the lake below. It's amazing. The water of the bath and the surface of the lake melt together, so it looks like we're floating in the sky. Now that she said that, the sight did resemble that image. I just gazed out at the stunning view. You know what they call these pools that look like they connected to the ocean or lake? Infinity edge pools. You find them at resorts and places like that overseas. Oh, Infinity Edge kind of sounds like a sword skill, I said tactlessly. She giggled. You're right. Probably a dagger skill. No, I'd say rapier. The conversation seemed light and harmless, but I was actually using all my concentration and effort to keep my gaze fixed on the lake outside. How could I be blamed? Just a few feet to the left, a pretty girl in a white bathing suit was lying face down, stretching her long legs out to the float on the water. No matter how far back I dredged up my real-life memories, there was nothing that featured me alone with a girl in a heated pool like this. The eerie floating sensation helped me give the scene a powerful tinge of unreality. I sat there, pointlessly counting the snowflakes falling outside, when I heard the door open from afar behind us. Asuna promptly sank into the water up to her mouth. I turned around and stared at the entrance up to the bathing chamber. There was a thin silhouette approaching beyond the floating steam, but I couldn't tell if it was a male or female. I kept staring until a yellow cursor finally appeared, and I heard a familiar female voice. So there you two are. Oh, it's just Kismel, I thought with relief. In the next instant, Asuna's hand shot the lightning on top of my head, clenching my hair and forcing me down under the water. She used that boost to leap out of the tub and run over to Kismel. I popped my head out of the water, feeling aggrieved only to see Asuna trying to push Kismel back through the steam. I couldn't tell what they were murmuring about from there, but within moments they were both retreating into the changing room for some reason. Before I could make up my mind whether to join them or wait, the door opened again, and they returned to the bathing hall. Asuna swung the smug again in her white one-piece, while Kismel wore a purple bikini over her dusky skin. That was when I finally understood why Asuna jumped out of the bath. She intercepted Kismel in total defenseless state and convinced her to go back so she could wear one of Asuna's handmade swimsuits. The dark elf followed Asuna into the tub and made her way over to me, sitting on the edge of the tub. So you're wearing your underwear, swimsuit, too, Kirito? Humankind certainly has some strange customs. I guess, I grunted. A faint smile played over her lips. But I seem to remember that in the camp's bathing tent you were... Gosh, what a huge bath this is, though, I shouted, cutting her off. I kept going, ignoring Asana's suspicious glare. If it's this big on the 4th floor castle, I can only imagine how big the bathing chamber is in the Queen's castle on the 9th floor. But of course, it is located in a much higher up than this one, with a view of the entire 9th floor, Kismel explained. Asana's pointed stare melted into that of a dreaming young girl. Kismel turned to her and looked apologetic. But I'm afraid that only the noble officials and the Queen's sworn knights can use it. Sadly, it may not be possible for humankind to enter. Oh, I see. But this bath is quite wonderful itself. I almost wish I could live in this castle forever, Asana responded. The dark elf knight smiled again, then looked downward, her long eyelashes laid over her cheeks. She scooped up some of the water in her hand and shook her head. I am happy that you like this castle, but it is best not to stay here for too long. Huh? Why? As you've seen, Yofil Castle is an impenetrable fortress surrounded by lake water and cliffs on all sides. From time immemorial, it has never fallen to an attack by goblins, orcs, or even forest elves. She paused for a moment. I lifted my face to fully out of the water to ask, Isn't that a good thing? We went to all the trouble to recover the Jade Key on the 3rd floor. Now it's safe and sound here, right? Yes, but because of its safety, the troops stationed here are too lax. They've driven back Forest Elves' attacks enough, but the Forest Elves have their fortress on land, and barely any ships. Winning every time through an easy advantage causes one's skill and heart to go soft. The slight irritation I heard in her voice poked at something in the back of my mind, but I couldn't remember what it was. Kismel kicked at the surface of the water with her long, shapely leg, then murmured unhappily. On top of that, the priests demand no metal armor within the castle grounds, as they find the noise unpleasant. With people like that around, there's no wonder things around here are getting all soft. And that's why you've been in a dress this whole time? Asana noted. The knight grimaced and nodded. It looks silly on me, doesn't it? Not at all, but it's best to wear what you like. I wonder if they would yell at us, too, if we had plate armor. Most likely. No need to test a theory. Good idea. They giggled like sisters. Meanwhile, I was trying to pull that thorn out of my memory. Long ago, how would the Forest Elves, with their lack of ships, have tried to send a great host of troops to seize the impenetrable Yofel Castle? If they actually used the inner tube fruit, I wouldn't mind seeing that. However, this meant that the Forest Elves did indeed acquire an adequate number of ships. The castle's defenses might not be so prepared. But the Forest Elves probably had their own taboo about taking living wood, so they couldn't arrange so many ships at once. Oh! At last, the thorn that blocked my thoughts fell out, and I exclaimed in shock. I stood up with a splash and pressed myself up against the glass wall behind me, looking down at the lakes surrounding the castle. The lake, glowing white with the darkness thanks to the snow piling up on the ice, looked otherwise normal, but at this very moment, enough ships to support an army were under construction at the other side of the floor, in the fallen elves' hideout. What's wrong, Kirito? Asana said. I snapped around at her face. Asana, today's the 24th, right? Obviously, she snapped, omitting the follow-up, it's Christmas Eve. I nodded vigorously. It was 2 days earlier that we'd overheard the conversation between General Nolza and the foreman Edda. The 22nd. They'd said that the plan would go into motion in 5 days. That meant the 27th, 3 days from now. Calculations complete. I turned to Kismel, too locked in to bother drinking in the sight of her in her bikini. We've got trouble, Kismel. It's almost positive that the forest elves are going to attack the castle in 3 days with an entire army. The dark elf knight, fine eyebrows tensed. I told you earlier, Kirito, the forest elves hardly have any ships. They cannot bring others down through the spirit tree. Even if they tried to swim to the shore, our ships would scatter them in moments. That's the thing. I stopped, unsure how to explain, but Asuna filled the gap with a gasp. Oh, are you saying the Fallen aren't going to attack Rovia, but here? What? You've seen the Fallen on this floor? Kismil demanded, rising from the edge of the tub. We both nodded, then took turns explaining everything that led to this, starting with the suspicious ship we spotted in Rovia. After a good 10 minutes of explanation, the sound of the quest advancement notification sounded, and the log window opened to show that Part 3 of the Shipwright of Your Quest had finished, meaning that the appropriate person we were meant to alert was someone in the Dark Elf forces. In our case, Kismel. A considerable experience point bonus bumped me up to level 17, and Asuna up to level 16. But we didn't have time to celebrate. Kismel stood up and said sharply, "We can't be relaxing here. You two, come with me." After a very rushed change of clothes, we were taken to the 5th floor castle, which I'd barely visited in the beta. 2 armed guards stood outside the large chamber doors, just to the right of the top of the stairs. With a determined glance from the elite knight, they both backed away quickly. On the other side of the door was a very large office, but the windows were all covered with curtains, making the room unnaturally dark. We crossed the room, taking care not to trip on the much thicker rug here, then stopped before a heavy desk in the very back. The 10-foot wide desk was made of a polished blackwood, as the elves could only fashion wood that had fallen naturally. This must be enormously valuable. With that in mind, I looked carefully at the figure seated on the other side. A lamp atop of the desk cast flickering light on a half-written parchment and ink puddle. But for some reason, the lid did not reach beyond the desk. I stared hard into the thick darkness enveloping the silhouette until a color cursor popped up right against the black. It read, "Yoflis, Dark Elven Viscount." What the heck was a Viscount? While I stood wondering, Kismel performed the Dark Elven salute of right fist to her left breast. "Viscount Yoflis, pardon my interruption. I have urgent matter that requires your attention." After a pause, a voice returned from the darkness. "Before I hear your report, may I ask why you have 2 humans with you, Kismel?" It was a flat voice that could be taken as young or brittle, but I couldn't tell if it was even a male or female at the moment. Kismel lowered her head to bow again, and I took a step forward and performed the same salute. The scroll with the details was in my belt pouch, so I produced it ceremoniously and handed it over to the desk. A slender hand extended from the darkness to take the scroll. With the trace of a finger, the seal evaporated and the parchment fell open. I see you're the ones that helped us recover the first key. I suppose it wouldn't do to feed you to the lakefish then. I couldn't tell if that last part meant to be a joke or not. Viscount Yoflis put the scroll into the drawer at the other side of the desk. "You're not giving it back? That's our identification inside the castle." But my panic lasted only a moment. The Viscount pulled something else out of the same drawer and held it out quickly. I quickly put out my cupped hands and caught 2 rings. They were made of a delicate silver make, marked with the familiar sigil of a horn and scimitar. "Wear those, and you will not be harried by my soldiers of Lysula, assuming you do not betray our patronage, of course." The Viscount warned. I bowed deeply and backed up next to Asuna. The 2 rings were identical. I handed one to my partner and put the other on my left index finger. Despite my avatar having 10 fingers, Aseo only allowed 1 ring to be equipped on either hand. I already had a ring of +1 to strength on my right hand, and a reward from the 3rd floor quest, so this used up all my ring potential. I resisted the urge to rudely check the properties of the new ring and listened to Euphlus and Kismel's conversation. So, Kismel, what is this report you have? My lord, according to the human warriors Kismel and Asuna, our sworn foe, General Nultza of the Fallen Elves, is on this floor. A moment later, the Viscount extended his hand, wrapped in the blackwood desk. Ah, these are indeed important tidings. I figured that this conversation was all pre-programmed, part of the campaign questline, but I couldn't help but to shiver as I felt like the temperature of the room dropped several degrees. What is that villain plotting this time? Well, it seems that the Fallen have made a serious deal with the Forest Elves, Kismel began, and summed up the important points of what we told her in the bath. The great volume of ships being built in the Fallen Elves' hideout, the likelihood that the Forest Elves would use those ships to attack Yulfil Castle in 3 days, their target, the Jade Key, being stored in the castle. I see. Do you know the number of ships the Fallen are building? Euphlus asked Kismel. She looked at me. I quickly snapped to attention and thought back to the image of the mountain of wooden boxes in the underground storeroom. In all honesty, I had no idea how much lumber each box represented, or how much was necessary to build a boat. But in that warehouse event, Asa and I had managed to squeeze into a single box. That had to be a hint. In simple terms, 1 box would be required for 2 small-seat boat. That would mean 5 boxes for large 10-man ships moored outside the castle. And there were at least 50 boxes stacked into the storeroom. So, I believe they are building at least 10 ships capable of transporting 10 soldiers each. Euphlus' right hand rapped the surface of the desk again. We have 8 10-man ships at the castle, and they will attack with more than that? My lord, I do not doubt the mettle of the castle's troops, but should we not transport the first and second keys up to a higher floor? Kismel suggested. The Viscount did not respond at first, but rapped on the desk more before speaking up. There is merit to Kismel's proposal. We cannot afford the keys to be stolen again, but the duty of the people of Lysula has always been to ensure 6 keys are spread apart, so they might not be gathered. If we send the first and second keys to the next floors up, they will join the third. This is not a desirable outcome. Kismel nodded. An uncomfortably heavy silence descended, only to be broken at last by Asuna. My lord, what happens if the 6 keys are gathered together? She asked bluntly. I stiffened up, but I wanted to know the answer too. In the beta, I was too focused on finding and chasing down the keys, but the actual story behind them was never made clear. Kismel turned around first and hastily started, Asuna, that's not... But the Viscount's hand from the darkness cut her off. It's fine, Kismel. I shall explain. But I cannot answer your question, human warrior. Even as the latest Viscount of Euphlus, a line extending back to the Great Separation, I only know a small part of the legend surrounding the key. The only person who knows the entire truth is our queen. No, the Viscount trailed off, delivered such a heavy sigh that I almost couldn't believe this was part of the campaign quest story event. It might be true even Her Majesty does not know the real truth. But, Viscount Euphlus, Kismel started, her voice hard. The Viscount raised a hand in apology. No, forgive me for saying that. Human warrior, this is all that I can tell you. The people of Lysula believe that if the 6 secret keys were gathered, allowing the door of the sanctuary to be opened, terrible ruin will come to Eingrad. Meanwhile, our ancient enemies, the Forest Elves of Kaelah, have a different interpretation. They believe that opening the sanctuary will return all floors of Eingrad to their original locations on the surface, and restore the great magic to the elves. Both Asa and I grunted in surprise. Return Eingrad to the surface. As Kirito, the VR MMO gamer, who lived in real life, I assumed that was completing impossible. The 100 of floors of Aincrad, which were up 6 miles across each, represented a tremendous amount of data. The idea that hundreds of floors might be laid out side by side into an even larger map that held all of them was preposterous. Now that we were trapped inside the game of death, the producers of the game, Argus, had no doubt gone out of business, the servers under supervision of the police. But did that mean the Forest Elf legend was false and the Dark Elf legend was true? No. That was hard to imagine, too. I didn't know what the terrible ruin meant in concrete terms, but if it actually meant the destruction of Aincrad and all the NPCs and players within it, that meant every player working on the Forest Elf faction in the campaign was in danger of killing everyone here, including themselves. It was impossible to imagine that our GM, Akihito Kayaba, wanted to end to his little game before we reached the 10th floor, and based off of Mr. Understanding, no less. Besides, the L4 questline had a separate conclusion for every player or party who initiated it. I couldn't see a single player who finished the campaign before everyone else being allowed to dictate the fate of all of Aincrad, and if the Forest and Dark Elf sides finished at the same time, the results would be self-contradictory. Terms like ruin and return had to be no more than key words meant to spice up the scenario and make it more exciting. No matter what happened in this quest, Aincrad wouldn't actually be affected. After a brief moment to reach that conclusion, I was about to breathe a calm to myself when Asuna tugged at my sleeve. "Hey, Kirito, didn't the Fallen Elf General say something about opening the sanctuary or whatever?" "Huh? Actually, now that you mention it." I searched my memory frantically and succeeded in playing back General Noltz's speech. I thought it might be important to relate to Kismel and Euphilis, so I turned to the darkness across the desk and put my stiff and proper tone of voice. My lord, General Noltza said thus: when the fallen elves gain all of the keys and open the sanctuary, the greatest magic of humankind would disappear. Magic of humankind? Euphilis repeated skeptically. The hand atop the desk flipped over. Kismel, do you know what this magic of humankind is? Well, though they are far inferior to those of elvenkind, the humans still have a number of ancient charms available to them. The only ones I'm familiar with are the charm of mystic scribing, in which their arms are tools and are placed within tiny paper scrolls, and the art of far scribing, to send written messages to distant places in an instant. The former referred to our menu windows, and the latter was our instant messages. As far as magic-like abilities that a player could make use of, those were about all I could think of. They do sound useful, but Euphilis seemed to have a habit of stopping to think. The fingers tapped on the surface of the desk yet again. I cannot imagine that Noltza would go to the trouble of aligning with the Forest Elves just to take away such paltry charms from humankind. Such abilities might be paltry to magic-wielding elf, but a player without their menu was in dire straits. On the other hand, that outcome was unimaginable. An RPG without its menu screen is like a bicycle without the handlebars or pedals. A few seconds later, Euphilis' voice returned, back to the steady cadence of a proper plot-centered conversation. In any case, the lapis key sealed in this floor probably ought to be retrieved, but the castle guards must prepare for the Forest Elves' siege. Warriors of humankind, will you assist Kismel in recovering the second key? A golden exclamation mark appeared in the midst of the darkness. This quest NPC marker was only visible to me and Asuna. For a moment, I wondered if that was another human charm. Asuna and I looked at each other and nodded. Yes, we will help. The exclamation mark turned into a question mark. Thus, the campaign quest resumed on the 4th floor. Kismel bowed deeply, and the viscount once more, then turned to us beaming. It is critical, but dangerous duty. I am overjoyed to fight alongside you again. Let us work together again, Asuna and Kirito. You bet! Let's do this, Kismel! No sooner were the cries out of our mouths than the third of the HP bar and name appeared in our party list, to the upper left of my view. The instant we were out of view of the guards outside of Euphilis' chamber, I raised my arms and stretched. Oh, that was nerve-wracking. I do not blame you. The Viscount is one of the most elderly of even the Dark Elves. I was a bit nervous myself. You too, Kismel? By the way, how old are you? I asked nonchalantly. But Asuna elbowed me roughly in the left side, and Kismel cleared her throat uncomfortably. Kirito, I do not know your human customs well, but among elven kind, it is considered rude to ask the age of another to her face. Oh, sorry, I didn't know. Let us just say that I'm considerably younger than Viscount Euphilis. Understood. I'm surprised that such a splendid castle master has soft warriors and arrogant priests working in his employ, though. I muttered as we descended the steps. Kismel put on a worried look. Yes, but there is a reason. Viscount Euphilis suffers from a very challenging ailment. Because of that, he cannot be exposed to the bright light. He has been in the chamber for a long... Most of the soldiers here have never even seen his face. He's sick, even though he's an elf? Elves are long-lived, but we are not immune to disease. The priests let their influence run unchecked because they are out of his sight, and yet they will be useless in the battle. It is a troubling state of affairs. Kismel shook her head and stopped in front of her room on the 4th floor, but when she spoke again, she had recovered her normal manner. At any rate, I appreciate the crucial information that you two have brought with you. It is late already, so let us begin our duty in the morning. Get your rest. Do not stay up all night. We promise. Good night, Kismel. The dark elf smiled and nodded, then retreated into her private room. The brand new HP bar tinkled into nothing with a sad little noise, but she would rejoin the party when we met up in the morning. Asa and I walked 10 yards down the corridor and into the suite room to the next door. I opened my window and checked the time to see that it was somehow past 10 o'clock at night already. The snow fell silently outside the window, and the trees in the front garden were already covered in white. We stood in the middle of the living room, gazing out at the night view, when I remembered something and lifted my left hand. I tapped the silver ring with my other hand. The property window told me that it was called the Sigil of Lysula. Magic effects. Ooh, agility +1? And a small bonus to skill proficiency gain. That's pretty nice. Asuna mumbled. Looking at my hand, for some reason she frowned, then looked down at her own hand, went bright red, and quickly touched her right hand with her left. Apparently, she just changed the finger the ring was on, but I didn't know why she needed to rush to do that. Something the matter? Nothing, she said flatly, so that was the end of that. Well, I think I'll go to bed. Oh, before that, I was gonna ask you something. What? It's about the castle master's name. What's viscount? I said curiously. She made a weird look, then sighed a very long sigh. It's pronounced viscount. Huh? You don't pronounce the S. It's a noble rank. You heard Kismel calling him my lord, right? Oh, so that's what it meant. So how high is a viscount? Normally it goes duke, marquise, count, viscount, baron from highest to lowest. I don't know how the dark elves order it, though. I see. Thanks for the explanation. It's a bit early, but how about 6 in the morning tomorrow? She agreed without a word. Great. Well then, good night. I was curious about why my partner would suddenly go so red and standoffish, but I figured she would be back to normal after a good night's sleep. But just as I opened my door to my bedroom, she spoke up. Kirito? Yes? I turned around to see that the fencer was still standing in the center of the room. She shrugged her shoulders a bit and looked up at me. I said this before we went to the bath, but I mean it. Thanks for today. It was more enjoyable and lovely than any Christmas Eve I've had in the real world. That took me by total surprise. I had no idea how to respond. After a few seconds, I found myself asking what I thought was a harmless question in response. What kind of Christmases did you have back there? She twirled the toe of her boot on a thick carpet, and a little smile snuck across her face. There was one time we were supposed to stay home because there would be a family Christmas party, but my father and mother didn't come home until very late, and I had to eat the cake by myself. Actually, that was pretty much every year. Oh, I see. I felt ashamed that all I could do was offer simple murmurs in response, but I didn't have anything better to relate to her. For the last 2 years, I'd wrapped up my Christmas family celebrations early so I could log in and participate in online in-game holiday events. Well, I'm glad you had a good time. If only we could have gotten cake prepared, I mumbled. The wan smile on Asana's face grew clearer. Yeah, but we can save that for next Christmas. Yeah, right. Well, I'm off to bed. Good night. Night. I watched her go through the door on the other side of the room, then entered my own and shut the door. It was plenty spacious, though not as much as the common room. There was a double-sized bed in the middle, a large chest that served as an extra item storage beneath the window, and a dresser with 3-sided mirror, which served no use for me. I took off my coat, boots, and protector before flapping back onto the bed. Next Christmas, huh? Asuna probably meant it in the most innocuous way possible, but the phrase carried a very heavy meaning. Today was the 48th day of the Game of Death. We'd taken 28 days to beat the first floor boss, 10 for the second, and 7 for the third. It took us 3 days to reach the midway point of this floor. It was reassuring to see the pace picking up, but I didn't think we could go much faster. We assumed that each floor would last around a week going forward. That put us on pace to finish the remaining 96 floors in 672 days. About a year and 10 months. That basically ensured that we would still be stuck in Aincrad for next Christmas. Perhaps Asuna hadn't been thinking about that when she said it, but looking up at the ceiling and imagining all those floors above made it feel like I was being crushed with the weight of it all. We had an ample safety margin in terms of level, but there was no guaranteed safe zones in MMORPGs. Not if you suddenly got a whole bunch of powerful monsters linked up into a group. Not if you couldn't recover from a negative status effect quick enough. Not if you slipped and fell from a height of a few dozen feet. Those would be all enough to knock down my HP to 0, resulting in the nerve gear frying my real brain wherever I was now. Just like that, Kirito, Kazuto, Kirigaya would cease to exist, disappearing from 2 worlds at once like froth on a riverbed. Of course, I had the option of staying put in the town of beginnings on the first floor. Instead, I leaped out of the city on the 48th day ago onto the next town, driven by something. And before I could split up with my very first partner, before I abandoned that poor SAO newbie, I left him with one piece of advice. We have to get stronger, stronger in order to survive. MMORPGs are battle over system resources. There are only so much gold, loot, and experience to go around, so the more you win, the stronger you get. I knew that I was right. The reason I'd survive until this day was because I used my beater's knowledge and experience to skillfully and efficiently earn gold levels in rare loot. There were several occasions where I might have died if my level was just one more lower or my gear was just 1 point weaker. But that was because I chose to leave safety and conquer the deadly game on my own. Why had I done that? I played back what Asuna had said just after I met her in the first floor town of Tolbana. If I was just going to hide back in the first city and waste away, I'd rather be myself until the very last moment, even if that means dying at the hands of a monster. I don't want to let this game beat me. I won't let that happen. It was a very Asuna-esque motivation. Dangerous, brave, and admirable. But it didn't have the same thought within myself. What about Lind and the Dragon Knights Brigade? Cabal of the Aincrad Liberation Squad? Diavel, the former beta tester who perished in the battle against the very first floor boss? What reasons had tilted the scale toward actual death, driving them to leave the safety of town into the dangers of the wild? I lay staring at the dark ceiling, unchecked thoughts spiraling through my head, when I just barely heard the sound of the other bedroom door opening out into the living room. Probably just Asuna preparing to take another bath, I assumed, but several minutes later, I hadn't heard the sound of another door opening or closing. Asuna didn't go from the living room into the bathroom, or out into the hallway, or even back into her own bedroom. After another 10 seconds of listening, I snuck out of bed, walked over to the carpet and my bare feet to the door, and carefully turned the knob. The lights in the living room were off, but the snowy illumination from the window cast the room into a monotone light and shadow. I slowly panned around the room until I spotted a lonely, rounded silhouette on the large sofa next to my wall, both legs curled into a ball. After a moment of hesitation, the door opened wide and I stepped into the common room. She should have noticed me by now, but Asuna didn't bulge from where she was. I approached the sofa as silently as I could, though I didn't know why. Can't sleep? After a few moments, the little head nodded. A few more seconds, she mumbled, "The room and the bed are just too big." I know what you mean. When I used the big barracks room on the second floor and logged out in the beta, we were packed into little bunk beds, I responded, sitting down on the other end of the sofa. If only I had the skill to whip up a nice mug of hot milk. Sadly, I had no milk in my inventory, and the room didn't have a stove. Instead, I did something that I would never normally do. I spoke my own baseless conjecture aloud. "Did you start thinking about next year?" She went absolutely still where we sat, about 5 feet away, then nodded again. Her forehead pressed against her knees. After a while, her quiet whisper trickled out into the room. "Until now, I've been trying to not think about the distant future. I told myself that I would only focus on what needed to be done each day. But that was just the same as trying to run from the future. Not even just thinking about the future floors left, or how much time it would take. I was trying to avoid facing the question of how much longer I could survive in this place. But then I was sitting in my room, looking out the window, and it all just sort of bubbled up inside me." The arm she held around her knees tensed and bulged. "I want to survive until next Christmas and see the snow falling in Aincrad again," she confessed, terribly painful but nearly soundless. I knew that I needed to say something, but my lips felt as though they were glued shut. I couldn't speak. I wanted to say, "You won't die before next Christmas, or before the day we beat this game. You'll survive." But what proof did I have of that? Obviously, Asuna's battle skill was second to none in the front line group, and the quality of her gear was guaranteed. But just as I told myself minutes ago, a single mistake here, or an unlucky bounce, could easily kill a player. If I couldn't reassure myself that I wouldn't die, I certainly couldn't offer that empty guarantee to someone else. After a stretch of silence so long I didn't know how much time had passed, I managed to croak something out of my avatar's throat. I'm sorry, I can't say anything. I don't have the strength to offer you any advice right now. For the very first time, Asuna had revealed her fear of the game in hope for the future, and I was so pathetic that I couldn't come up with anything better to say. I stood up, ready to retreat into my room. But just as I passed Asuna on the right end of the sofa, she extended a hand and caught me at the hem of my shirt. She pulled me down with a surprising force until I was sitting next to her. Then get stronger. I held my breath. Huh? Get stronger until one day you can tell me and frightened people like me that I'll be okay. Once again, I was left speechless. I looked down at my hands. How many levels would I need to gain to be able to say that to anyone? Another 20 or 30 wouldn't be nearly enough. I felt plagued by the sense that the strength Asuna was speaking of was very different kind, something that I didn't usually find myself thinking about. She tilted herself to the left and laid her little head on my right shoulder. You don't have to say anything now, as long as you sit there until I fall asleep. Okay, I stammered. Asuna smiled and closed her eyes. In less than a minute, I heard true sleep in her breathing. She said until she was asleep, so I could roll her down onto the sofa and retreat to my bedroom. She couldn't complain, but given her difficulty in staying asleep, that seemed nearly impossible. I was stuck where I was until she eventually woke up. I tried to relax my shoulders and leaned my back against the back of the sofa. Be stronger. That was a command I gave myself when I was racing out of the town of beginnings, or fleeing, depending on how you looked at it. I rushed to gain levels, get new gear, and power myself up faster than anyone else. For some reason, I couldn't really explain. I was driven by something I couldn't name. Was it Asuna who gave me a reason? I had to be stronger so that the next time she or anyone else revealed their weakness to me, I could be that reassuring presence who said, "No, you won't have to die. It'll be okay." Was it right for me to be thinking that way? Suddenly, Asuna shivered as she leaned on me. She hadn't woken up. She must have felt a shiver in her sleep. The winter night seemed a bit chilly just for a sheer tunic. If only I had some kind of player skill to whip up a nice warm blanket for her. Sadly, there was nothing of the sort in my inventory. Oh, I murmured, and opened my window. Over the storage tab and selected a particular item and materialized it. A thin, silvery fabric fell lightly into my hands. Argyro's sheet that came into hand in the fallen elf's watery hideout. It was big enough to hide an entire gondola, so it would easily serve as a blanket. There was only a bit of durability remaining, but because we weren't on the water now, it wouldn't drain anyway. I wrapped the blanket around us, and the chill that filled the room seemed to vanish at once, bringing pleasant sleepiness into my head. Before I closed my window, I set my alarm to go off at 5:30 in the morning and closed my eyes. December 5th and December 26th passed in the blink of an eye, as we spent them undertaking the Lapis Key quests for Viscount Euphlus. They weren't easy quests by any means, but the latest level up for both of us, plus the unusually overpowered presence of Kismel the Elite Knight, we never really struggled at any point. The Prelude quest on the first day had us running back and forth, but by the afternoon of the second day, we found the underwater dungeon that housed the key. We defeated the dual-hand type boss monster, its body covered in verdigris, to gain the second secret key, this one brilliant marine blue. There were no sneak attacks by masked fallen at this time, and we were back at Yofil Castle before dinner. After reporting on the quest to the viscount and receiving our considerable reward, the large window at the west end of the hallway showed brilliant sunset. I stretched to my fullest in the red light. Well, we managed to get the second key right as planned. The viscount put it away in the little chamber behind his desk. I wonder if the first one's in there too, I murmured to myself. Kismel answered that question, happy to be back in her familiar armor. That's right. That means if the forest elves manage to reach the 5th floor on the castle, it's quite likely they might make off with the keys. Viscount Yoflis might be excellent with a rapier, but he cannot be forced to fight in a sickly state. Don't worry, Kismel. They won't even step onto the dock, much less reach the 5th floor, Asuna proclaimed confidently. She'd been quite energetic and spirited the last 2 days. She must have really enjoyed the chance to fight alongside Kismel again. Whether they come in 10 or 20 ships, we'll sink them all. I'm glad to hear it, Kismel said, patting Asuna's back before she turned to me. Kirito, Asuna, the fact that we have recovered the lapis key in just 2 days is a sign of not just our own strength, but that of your ship. And what makes me happiest of all is that you chose to give such a beautiful craft my sister's name. She trailed off and strode towards the nearby window. The north-facing window looked out upon the front garden and gate, as well as the long pier beyond that. To the side of the pier were 8 large gondolas, painted black, and 1 little white one, our till now bobbing in the waves. My sister loved to swim, ever since the day she was young. She and I often rowed on a little pleasure boat in the city on the 9th floor. Looking at the till now brings back old memories. Asuna quietly approached the reminiscing Kismel from the right. I watched the setting sun sparkle in her hair and thought hard. The possibility that a dark elf herbalist named Tilnell, who was Kismel's twin sister, actually existed in NPC Eincred was very low. SAO's service period began only 50 days ago. In a sense, Kismel's dark elves and the forest elves' foes were born in that instant. Tilnell was nothing more than data created to serve as background for Kismel. But each time Kismel spoke her memories of Tilnell, that data in the server got overwritten in a more detailed form. Even a woman who existed only as a background information became truth through those memories, it seemed to me. I cleared my throat at Kismel's left and told her about something Asa and I discussed during the key quest. Kismel, we have a request. As long as I can help. Yes, well, our books of mystic scribing cannot hold large objects like ships, but we also cannot pick ours up and climb the Pillar of Heavens with it. When we move up to the 5th floor, we will need to keep Tilnell somewhere here on this floor. As the dark elf listened patiently, Asuna spoke up next. You see, Kismel, before we leave to the 5th floor, Kirito and I want to leave the Tilnell with you, even if you just leave her here on the dock of Yofel Castle. Last night, the two of us had discussed whether this would be even possible, if the game systems prohibited it. We were afraid that this might cause undue stress on Kismel's AI. Normally, it was not possible to pass items on to NPCs. When we found the Dark Elf Knight's sigil on the 3rd floor cave and tried to give it to Kismel, she claimed that we should pass it to the commander ourselves. And when Asuna gave Kismel her purple bikini at the bath, Kismel returned it before they left the changing room. But there was no need to change ownership of the item if you're just leaving it moored on the dock. If Kismel just accepted the Tilnell in spirit and thought of her sister when she gazed upon it, that was all we could ask for. How to get from this castle to the Labyrinth Tower was a problem, but we had the inner tubes if it came to that. As we waited on her answer, with bated breath, the knight turned to the window, her armor clanking. After a few moments, her voice emerged, quietly, but with emotion you would never hear from an NPC. Of course you can. I will take responsibility for your precious boat. But promise me one thing. What is it, Kismel? Come back to this castle sometime and give me a ride on her. Then it was our turn to shout, Of course!